5,000 to 1. Those were the odds that this story would come true. The English Premier League, considered to be the hardest domestic league in world football. Since it began over 30 years ago, only 7 clubs have had the honour of lifting the trophy, and you likely recognise a lot of the winners' names. Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal and Chelsea. And aside from Alan Shearer's Blackburn, there's one that stands out from the rest. Leicester City.
Impossibly, illogically, humbly, charmingly, life-affirmingly, gloriously.
5 points clear with 9 games to go. This actually might happen, you know.
In 2016, Leicester City are the champions of England.
A club promoted from the second tier of English football in 2014, almost being relegated in 2015, and going on to have Premier League winners' medals around their necks in 2016. This is the story of a side worth only £28 million, who somehow won a Premier League. The first piece to the puzzle was a new manager. The previous year, Leicester had only just beaten relegation, with 7 wins from their last 9 matches being named one of the greatest escapes from the bottom 3 in Premier League history. This, paired with a rather questionable public relations issue that would get me demonetised if I showed it, left Nigel Pearson being sacked, and former Chelsea manager Claudio Ranieri taking his place, who had garnered the nickname the Tinkerer for making many small changes to his teams with little to no positive results. Journalist Marcus Christensen said, "If Leicester wanted someone nice, they've got him. If they wanted someone to keep them in the Premier League, then they may have got the wrong guy." He hadn't seen much success during his managerial career, with the UEFA Super Cup over a decade earlier with Valencia being the highlight, which was worrying, considering that he'd managed 15 teams over the previous 30 years. But even so, the deal was done, and the next piece to the puzzle was to assemble a winning group of players. He already had some key characters that would go on to play pivotal roles. Riyad Mahrez had joined just 2 years earlier for £450,000, and Jamie Vardy was signed the previous season for £1 million. Claudio spent a further £49 million over the summer transfer market on players like Okazaki, Damari Gray, Christian Fuchs, and the standout signing of the season, N'Golo Kante. Manchester United had a team worth £400 million, and Manchester City's was worth over £450. With a first-team squad worth £28 million, not a single player, staff member or fan had any idea what this group of players would go on to achieve. Son of Peter Schmeichel Kasper led with a commanding physical presence from the back, with powerhouses in captain Wes Morgan and Robert Huth just in front. Free transfer Fuchs on the left and Simpson on the right, but it'd be the centre mids that would have the standout season. The pair of Kante and Drinkwater, who were at the time worth £9 million between them, would end the season worth over 70, and their double pivots would be vital in helping them deal with the attack of England's most dangerous teams. The now incredibly talented winger Mahrez played on the right, who was at the time worth only £450,000. He'd go for a transfer fee of 66 times that amount only a few years later. Free transfer Albrighton played on the left, and up front, new signing Okazaki, and of course, record breaker Jamie Vardy, the man fueled by Red Bulls and pure passion. It wasn't a championship winning side, or so it seemed, but it should hopefully have them avoiding relegation. Safe to say they did a little better than that. But how? Their style of play was the exact opposite of every other champion in Premier League history, with the majority of winners dominating other teams and having most of the ball. Leicester had an average of 44.7% possession per game, which was the 3rd lowest in the entire league. They allowed and even welcomed teams to pressure them for the full 90 minutes, only to later spring into attack when the opposition was least expecting. Using a compact 4-4-2 formation, they were able to condense into a tightly coiled spring that made it extremely hard for attackers to break through, and for this reason they only conceded 36 goals over the entire season, the 2nd lowest of any team in the league behind Tottenham and Manchester United. The double pivot of Kante and Drinkwater meant they were able to pick up and tightly mark attacking dangers when they came into their zone, and were then passed off when they moved out of their zone, ensuring that danger men were constantly man-marked. They closed the centre and stayed narrow, until a fast break ended with Jamie Vardy sprinting down the pitch and scoring a goal, leading to 5 goals directly from counterattacks, the second most in the league that season. They had mastered exploiting teams who couldn't transition from attack to defence as quickly as they could. But was this plan going to be enough? They were set up like a bottom half team who wanted to scrape enough points to avoid relegation, soaking up pressure and countering with pace. Their closest rivals were made up of household names in English football that you'd expect to be challenging for titles. City were continuing their rise to becoming the top team in Europe pre-Guardiola, led by club legend Sergio Aguero and coming second in the league the previous year, also making it out of the Champions League group stage. Arsenal were the favourites, tipped to win the league for the first time since 2004. They'd won the FA Cup and the Community Shield the previous year, finishing the league campaign in third, led by top goalscorer Alexis Sanchez. These were top teams full of expensive talent, where one player cost more than Leicester's entire squad, and they were firing on all cylinders. This is who little Leicester had to fight against. But despite the public doubts about their new manager, Leicester started off the season incredibly well.
Mistake from Kabul, and Mark Albrighton scores now!
Jamie Vardy, who had only turned professional 5 years earlier, scored 13 goals over 11 straight games, breaking a record held by United legend Ruud van Nistelrooy, who had previously scored in 10 straight games. Mahrez was showing the attacking talent of a seasoned European football veteran worth £50 million, rather than $450,000. And Kante and Drinkwater were bullying midfields that on paper were worth 20 times more than them. A 4-2 win over Sunderland on the opening day and a saved point against a Tottenham side that would end the season in the top 4 had them starting on a high. A well-remembered comeback on the 13th of September against Aston Villa, which saw Jack Grealish scoring in the first half and giving them a 2-0 lead, left Leicester with a mountain to climb. Goals from Vardy, Talat and Nathan Dyer left them with a 3-2 win. The odds were still 5,000 to 1 after the first month, even though they had taken 8 points from their opening 4 games. This was just considered a good start. Vardy would break his record in November, after scoring a goal against Manchester United that finished in a 1-1 draw.
Damian Vardy! It's 11! It's heaven for Jamie Vardy!
But his personal performances that season were some that had never been seen before in English football. He seemed truly unstoppable, and Leicester's playstyle of playing off of counter-attacks gave him the perfect system for success to abuse his rapid pace. After a hat-trick from Mahrez in a 3-0 win against Swansea and a 2-1 win against Chelsea, they were second in the Premier League by the New Year's break. They nestled behind Arsenal with 11 wins, 6 draws and 2 losses, seemingly trying not to draw too much attention to themselves. Their cheap squad of incredibly well-scouted talent was paying off. Their position by Christmas was a miracle in itself, before you even consider what happened for the remainder of the season. But with the most goals scored so far in that season, drawn with Manchester City, it was no surprise that they had become a team that even the top clubs feared. The odds were beginning to turn, 10 to 1. A 1-0 win over Tottenham and a 3-0 win against Stoke took them to the top of the league in January, moving 3 points clear as Manchester City and Arsenal both drew important matches, and February would solidify Leicester's chances as a title contender. A now infamous Vardy goal against Liverpool from 30 yards out helped them beat the Reds 2-0. 4 days later, they had to overcome one of the toughest challenges of the season, playing now second place Manchester City. A goal from a player who had no idea that he'd end up at his opposition club in a few years' time, and 2 goals from centre-back Huth put the Foxes 5 points clear at the top of the table. The dream, if it wasn't already, was truly alive. But Arsenal would dampen the mood. February 14th saw the two teams clash, and Vardy gave them a 1-0 lead, until they were reduced to 10 men early in the second half. Theo Walcott would equalise, and a goal with the final kick of the game from Danny Welbeck would halt the momentum that they had built over the previous 2 months. The game was close, but did it show the difference in class between them and the top sides? Were they going to be able to hold on? While still 2 points clear at the top, they needed to continue to perform if they wanted any chance at the title. Bearing in mind, this wasn't a set of players who would ever challenge for a title so large, with many of them being valued at under £2 million at the start of the season, Were they even fit enough to keep going for an entire year? This was a championship side with a few upgrades, trying to win the most prestigious league title in the world. March 2016. A 2-2 draw against West Brom started the month off shakily. But wins against Watford, Newcastle and Crystal Palace would reinvigorate them and rebuild the momentum that had temporarily been stopped by Arsenal. April would also be a massive month in the title race, as well as in the history of Leicester City's football club. Tottenham's win over Manchester United secured Leicester's place in the Champions League for the first time since the club was founded over 140 years ago. Any club who had achieved what they had, having only been promoted a season earlier, and playing a side that was 16 times less expensive than the team currently in second place, would have called this the best season in their history and been happy with what they had already achieved. But not Leicester. They'd come too far already. They were coming for that title no matter what. At this point, they were 5 points clear at the top of the table, and they were also the betting favourites, 4-9. Would the pressure start to pile on now that it was almost expected of them to seal the title, or would they rally? On the 17th of April, maybe the former was closer to the truth. Vardy scored his 22nd goal of the season against West Ham, but after a second yellow card, Vardy was sent off. 2 West Ham goals later, and Aloha was left having to rescue just a point, in a game that they definitely should have won. Tottenham were on their tail, and Manchester City and Arsenal weren't far behind. May 2016, the final stretch. The odds were now 1-20. They started the month with a 1-1 draw that would see one of their most pivotal players, Drinkwater, being given a red card. This wasn't what they needed. They were so close. All they needed was 2 more points to guarantee that they'd be champions. The biggest underdog story in world football was edging ever closer. The manager who was once seemingly destined for failure was now being called a genius, and just 1 week later, maybe the title decider. May 2nd, 2016. Derby day between Tottenham and Chelsea. If Tottenham lost, Leicester had won it. If Tottenham won, they had 2 more games to get 2 points against Everton and Chelsea. 2-0 to Tottenham at the break.
Son scores 2-0 Tottenham on the cusp of half-time.
It seemed like they were going to have to do it the hard way. Or would they? 2-1.
Williams corner beyond Terry for Cahill. Lashes Chelsea back into it.
There was still hope. Thousands of Leicester fans waited patiently, the players on the edge of their seats, praying for Chelsea to get another. Was it finally here? The biggest miracle that they'd ever witnessed in their life. The minutes were ticking by. 60th minute, 70th minute, 80th minute, 83rd minute.
Away from Alderweireld, Diego Costa.
2-2.
Glorious goal! Leicester's goal!
The clock ticked down, 7 minutes to go, until after what felt like days, Leicester City were crowned champions. 5,000 to 1. If you put just £1 on this happening, you'd be £5,000 richer. That's how small the chance of Leicester City, a championship side worth 28 million, who by the end of the season was worth over 150. With a manager that no one had faith in to keep them up from relegation, let alone win the entire competition, and a few players that would go on to be some of the biggest bargains ever in world football. That was the story of how Leicester City won a Premier League.